am Chief Operating Officer for the Oweesta Corporation. It's such an honor to be with you all today. Native CDFIs in our portfolio, as Crystal Cornelius shared this morning, made $71 million in loans last year, and they saved nearly 5,000 jobs in the height of a global pandemic. And yet they reported to us that they were unable to finance $41 million last year in their own community needs due to lack of capital, and reported needing $85 million in future years in order to service their growing needs in their communities. We see at Oweesta the importance of social investors and potentially being part of the solution to those challenges and the challenges of capital access in Native communities. We are super excited to have a panel today with some social investors and to connect and talk about all of the different opportunities that are available for Native CDFIs and have some shared learning from them. While we're introducing ourselves, I would love if you would introduce yourselves for those of you who are in our attendee hub, and go ahead and throw up in the chat where you're from and who you are, because we actually can't see on our end, and we would just love to know that you're there and that you're listening, and it'll help us as we sort of frame our comments and start our panel conversations today. I am so lucky to have three amazing panelists today, and they have biographies on our website, which are as impressive as they are kind. So we would encourage you to check those out. We're joined by Susan Finney Silver from the David and Lucille Packard Foundation. We're joined by Sarah Smith, who's the Director of Mercy Partnership Fund. Sarah spent more than 30 years in the community development field, so we're so happy to have her join us today. And Andreas Hippel, the Executive Director of the Better Way Foundation. So we are just really excited for our dialogue, and I'm gonna just hop right into it then. We're gonna try to keep this very conversational. So please, as we go, if you have questions about what they're saying or sharing, please do use that chat feature for us so we can answer our questions as we go along too. But with that, I would just ask my panelists, starting with Andreas, you're first on the left of my screen. Would you go ahead and introduce yourself and share a little bit about the organization that you represent?
Yeah, thanks, Crystal. Appreciate it. And I'm grateful for the opportunity to be here and to hear that there's so much excitement about these conversations, because these are exciting conversations. I'm Executive Director of Better Way Foundation, based here on occupied Dakota land in Minneapolis. And we are a private family foundation. We've been around for officially probably about 30 years. But really in the last 5 years have taken a real hard look at ourselves and a hard look at opportunities in Indian country. And that's started with our grant making, focused on early childhood development, which is what our foundation is focused on, and seeing if there was an opportunity to be helpful in Indian country. And that has taken off and grown, advised by some incredible Indigenous women along the way, and become by far our biggest and most central kind of grant making initiative and grant making work. We fund work in Pine Ridge, South Dakota, work in several pueblos down in New Mexico, various Native nations and urban areas here in Minnesota, as well as various other places as well. And as we have gone deeper into that work, we've seen opportunities and looked at ourselves again and said, how can we further align our mission and our money, and ultimately put that money to use in ways that truly is complementary to our goals around grant making, which are to support Native-led, Native-owned organizations, and saying how can we unlock some of that capital to support the broader agenda of progress within Indigenous communities. And so that drew us into our impact investing work, which in 2018 kicked off, and so far has all been focused on Native CDFIs. And it started with Oweesta in 2018 and has since then grown to 4 additional Native CDFIs directly, probably a couple more on the way. And I'll talk more about that in due course, but it's been exciting. It's been a great journey so far, and we look forward to more ahead. So I'll pause there, Crystal.
Awesome, thank you so much. And I love that. We sometimes joke that we're sort of the the gateway where we get you hooked. And then we love when we get to see our partners transition to direct service with native CDFIs. That's wonderful. Sarah, would you go next? Share
Sure. And good afternoon, and thanks, Crystal. It's great to be here, and it's great to hear how many attendees you have for this conference and sessions. Happy to be participating. I'm Sarah Smith, and I'm director of the Mercy Partnership Fund, which is the global community investing program of Mercy Investment Services, which is the socially responsible asset management ministry of the Sisters of Mercy. They are a Catholic women's religious congregation. We provide below market rate investments to mission-driven organizations that are working on projects that have got high social and environmental impact. We are not a foundation. The funds that we lend to community projects are from a pool of funds that the sisters have saved over the years for their retirement, and also for their ministries, so that when we make a loan, we need to know that it's going to be paid back, because the sisters are going to need it in the future. But in the meantime, until they need it, we have flexibility in the terms that we provide. By way of background, the Sisters of Mercy and other religious communities were among the pioneers in impact investing nearly 5 decades ago. And often they were the first or early investor, providing low interest loans to what were early community loan funds, such as Oweesta, as well as some community development credit unions. So we have continued the tradition that they started many years ago, using our resources mainly to finance intermediary organizations that are pursuing projects both in the US and around the globe. We have 3 main impact objectives that we look to provide resources to the intermediary organizations. They include helping to reduce economic poverty, with a special focus on those who are underserved by traditional financial sources, supporting economic, health, and educational opportunities, especially for women, children, migrants, refugees, and people of color, and protecting the environment. So let me just stop there, and I'll get into some of the details a little later.
Awesome. And last but certainly not least, Susan, would you go ahead and introduce?
Absolutely. And I just want to start by saying I'm really honored to be on this panel with Sarah, Andreas, and Crystal with the long track record that you all have. We have a long track record with mission investing, but not so much with community lending and Native communities. And really part of my interest in being on this panel is learning. So looking forward to the conversation. So yes, Susan Finney-Silver. I'm with the David and Lucille Packard Foundation. We are a family foundation, the Packard family. Our mission investing program was one of the earliest foundation mission investing programs. We've been doing this for about 40 years. We have a carve out from our endowment. So my team sits separately from our grant making and separately from our endowment investing. And we actually were just increased on Friday. Our board increased us to 250 million carved out from our endowment for mission investing. And the way we work is we work alongside our programmatic priorities. And so those priorities have been within the environmental arena, fighting climate change, healthy oceans, a lot with, and we've done a lot of both grant making and investing around reproductive rights and justice and reproductive health options for women, early childhood education. So our investing has been very aligned with those programmatic priorities. Somewhat absent in that is the sort of community lending that, Sarah and Andreas have such a great long track record doing. I will say on a personal note, I spent about 15 years in community lending before I came to the Packard Foundation. So I have both a passion and it's near and dear to my heart, but has not been historically within the programmatic priorities of the Packard Foundation. So we can talk about it more later, but we in June of last year, so exactly a year ago, given everything that's happening in our country, our board made a major commitment to finding ways to address racial equity, both through making a $100 million grant making commitment, as well as a $25 million mission investing commitment. So that's really what introduced us to Oweesta, the great work of Oweesta, and we approved a $5 million investment there. And so we're very early in our learning journey, and I'm really excited to be here today to learn from you all.
Awesome. Thank you guys so much. Appreciate that. So I'm curious, Susan, you're a little newer to the journey into the space, but Andreas and Sarah, you both have been working in the CDFI investment space for a little bit now. Could you tell us a little bit about the types of investments that you do, such as the term and the size, so that we can get a sense of sort of what that social investment can look like? And then also, how do CDFIs begin to develop a relationship with an organization like yours? Because I picked on Andreas first last time, I'm going to ask Sarah that question first.
Sure. Well, we provide below market rate financing, usually in the form of loans in the 2 to 3% interest range for 3 to 5 years. But we look to establish relationships so that we frequently will renew those loans if that makes sense from both the investee perspective as well as ours. The recipients are mission-driven intermediary organizations. So we look to these organizations to be, in effect, our boots on the ground. We don't rarely include programmatic or geographic restrictions. When we do the underwriting, we're looking at the totality of what the organization does. And we want them to make the best decisions with the money that we provide. In addition to CDFIs, we have also provided mission deposits in community development credit unions and banks, such as Native American Bank. We find deposits are an effective way of providing support so that folks can have access to affordable capital. Microfinance lenders. We also participated in some structured funds that have been formed to address a specific issue. So those are again, an intermediary lender in terms of generally groups wouldn't come to us to necessarily fund a specific affordable housing project, for instance. And then in terms of how organizations find out about us and connect with us, I'd say in a variety of ways, and it's always evolving. So for instance, this past year, I've met so many people on webinars like this that I've had nice follow-up connections with. But pre-pandemic, certainly connected a lot at conferences. As part of our annual planning process, when we periodically identify particular focus areas, we'll reach out to organizations to learn more about their work, look to thought leaders to get some advice on who's doing what, get other referrals from those in the field. Organizations will connect with us via the website. We ask them when they do connect with us to identify how what they're doing might address with our impact objectives so that we can let them know if it's worth an additional conversation. And then in general, if a conversation and initial due diligence seems like there might be a good fit, we'll ask for a full application. We only make 4 to 6 new investments a year, so we're really selective with the organizations that we request full information from, because we don't want to waste their time if we don't think it would be of interest to our selection committee. That's the short version.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And I would just reiterate, having been through the due diligence process with you, Sarah, it's sort of the intentionality with which you make that space really good for the partner. So thank you for that. I think it's Andreas. Would you share a little bit about your investments?
Gladly, and I love what you said, Sarah, about due diligence being, more than just looking at numbers, and clearly the relationship matters to you. It's something that also matters to us at Better Way Foundation. And as As we've entered this space, we've been, again, very intentional about not coming in and just trying to be uninvolved and be sort of distant, but actually really trying to understand the potential investments and the situations that the Native CDFI partners are working in, and do our own homework to really get our heads around how can we be helpful in other ways as well as making loans. But fundamentally, the terms and so forth for us, we're typically looking at 5 to 7 year loans. 2% has been the typical interest rate for us, not set in stone, but very much that's typically our starting point for a conversation. We're not a huge foundation. We're about 60 million in assets, so we're really talking currently a 5% carve out of our endowment to this program related investing, which means that we're looking at $250,000 to $500,000 chunks of investment. And that is driven then by an interest in trying to do more good and be supportive of communities where we're also investing as a grant maker, as a partner in that way. So that has been one lens that we have approached this. So when I talked about Pine Ridge and South Dakota and Minnesota, New Mexico, that has been a very natural place for us to start looking. And so building relationships with folks like Lakota Funds and Tiwa Lending Corp, and others who work in those areas and are of those areas, that's been an important part for us. Beyond that, our approach has been one that it's driven by a small foundation. So some of the realities of small foundations, which means that we have a small team. Our investment manager works for ourselves and our and 3 out of our 4 sister foundations. They're all associated with the same family, and we've sought to do some shared learning together. I'm deeply involved, as are several board members who have impact investing background. We have brought on over the past 3-4 years 2 Indigenous board members for complementing and supporting what has traditionally been a very white Catholic family, and in its in the work they do, and they've been really great at integrating and having folks in leadership roles who are coming in from community. Patrice Kunish, who many of you know, and she has spoken with this forum before, has been a board member of ours, and she's our vice chair currently, and she's a Native CDFI expert, has been a great contributor to us learning around this space. And so as we've figured out our strategy, we focused on 4 areas for our impact investing, and that's education, because that's what our grant making interest is. It's also equity, environment, and then economic development. So those are the 4 things that we look for. We wouldn't put a program related investment in place if we didn't think we were touching on at least one of those. The truth is, of course, economic development that's pretty broad. So it gives us a lot of flexibility, but we're trying to focus on those geographies where our program partners are, and really trying to build those relationships so that, similar to, I think what Sarah said, we're not trying to do one-offs, we're trying to build relationships and hopefully have long-term recurring investments as well.
Awesome. Yeah, Andres, I'm curious, you talked about sort of that cluster of families, like, is that common sort of in the family foundation space to have related partners like that?
It varies quite a bit. It's the old adage that every foundation is unique, right? But family foundations, I think, vary quite a bit. I don't think it's that typical, but some families certainly have created multiple vehicles. In our case, the founding generation created multiple vehicles for their big Catholic family to have impact in the world, and family members continue to be a majority of the board on all but one of the foundations. But really, that allows for multiple opportunities to do cross-learning. I used to work for one of the sister foundations. We come together and do webinars with our multiple boards. Actually, Stephanie has done one with the multiple foundation boards, and it creates an opportunity that even though we are a relatively small foundation, we have opportunity to sort of raise these issues with others. And I think there's an important takeaway there, which is that for those of us who are investing in this space, who are supporters of Native CDFIs, I think there's an opportunity for us to talk about that and to try to influence others, whether they're within our immediate circles within our geographic circles as philanthropists or other peers in this industry.
Awesome. Well, you're here on that. I love that. And I heard from both of you really, and I think it probably, no doubt it will be a theme for all of us, but I heard a strong interest in building long-term relationships. And as the CDFI partner, I can say that that's equally as important to us. For example, when COVID happened and we needed to readjust our interest rates on our portfolio, having partners that we had real relationships with that we could call and be really transparent about what was happening was really important to us too. So definitely important on both sides. With that, Susan, I know that you're newer to the space. You're newer to not professionally you, but so much, but your foundation. And so I'm just curious, could you share a little bit about how those conversations evolved at your foundation, and how you kind of first heard of Native CDFIs and why you're doing that? Since Susan is a new investor to the space, could our Native CDFIs that are in the room light up our chat boards and tell us a little bit what matters to you in an investment relationship? Because as I mentioned, investment is a two-way partnership. So love to hear from our CDFIs in the chat a little bit about what's important to them in investor relationship. And Susan, could you go ahead and just jump in and share some of your thoughts with us?
Great. Yeah, would love to. So yes, I think that our the foundation's journey in this arena, as I said, started a year ago, a lot with, excuse me, the reckoning, that's happening in our country. But I would also, excuse me, I got a little cough, tap into what Crystal, you and Andreas were talking about. We are very much a family foundation, the Packard family, and we are going through, we have a new CEO. We're also going through, a generational shift of the one generation kind of turning the reins over to the next generation of the Packard family. So we're very much evolving and figuring out, we have some long-standing programmatic commitments, but then how do we evolve that going into the future? So this commitment really is part of that, as we as a foundation, as a larger foundation, figure out sort of how to shift our priorities as the world is shifting. So so last June, as I mentioned, we made a $100 million grant commitment, and then our team, the mission investing team, was given a charge of $25 million. And it was a very big deal. So I really want to emphasize, not just the amount of money, but really that we traditionally have always worked very much with our program officers in our program areas. It kind of keeps us safe in terms of, there are sector experts, there are impact experts. And so for the board to say, we're going to go outside all of our current programmatic priorities and allow you to make $25 million available as a team, what was a pretty major step, and I think really showed their commitment to really both stepping in and learning about, BIPOC and community lending, and how we might have a role there. So I think the intention was to go out and make the investments. So we, over the last few quarters, we've originated the $25 million in the form of 6 different investments. One of them is the $5 million investment to Oweesta to help benefit Native CDFIs around the country, as well as a number of others I can get into if people are interested. But in each case, we're targeting different types of community lending and organizations that are really on the forefront of addressing BIPOC, racial equity credit gaps that exist in our country. And so, our goal is both to start to address those, but really this is a learning journey. So our goal really very much, there's definitely a theme here about building relationships. Our goal really is to build learning relationships. So, in this case with Oweesta, to really learn from Oweesta's members and all the Native CDFIs about what are the credit gaps, how can mission investments and be helpful, so that we can take that information back to our board, to our leadership, to really help form what will be our strategy going forward. But, will we continue in this area? If we do, what are some compelling ways that we can really have an impact doing that? So I think there is an opportunity, not just with the immediate dollars, but the hope is to really, we have a consultant who's going to be out talking to people. So the offer really very much is, we would love to hear, from many of you, as we learn and figure out our path forward, in this arena.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing a little bit about your journey. And I'm curious, Stephanie, you are monitoring our chat. Is there any sort of observations that our native CDFIs shared about sort of what they're looking in investment relationship that you could share out with us?
There is nothing in the chat at this time.
Okay.
Just everyone's introductions so far. So,
okay, no worries. We would encourage you all to just go ahead and keep adding in any thoughts you have as a native CDFI leader throughout the course of our conversation too, about what makes a good investing partnership for you all as we go through, and we can double check again at the end as well. So, but thank you so much, Susan, for sharing a little bit about your journey. And I got to kind of hear a little bit about it from Susan, and you guys, Andreas and Sarah, you talked about it just a little bit. Could you just share a little bit what really drew you about the work that native CDFIs are doing?
I'm happy to jump in. What really drew us initially was, I guess we're approaching it in this way. We wanted to find program-related investments that would truly support community on the terms that community demands, which is like that it's actually led by folks from the community. And we didn't want to be putting money into a vehicle that was outsiders coming in, but we love that native CDFIs are typically led by staff by folks who not only understand and know the community, but are of the community. And that's just powerful. It's just no one has the solutions for any community other than the people in those communities. And that is truer than ever for folks in any country. And, as a privileged white man in an urban center, I know I'm not going to be the one who figures out why someone needs to loan X dollars to support a agricultural project on Pine Ridge, but I'm sure absolutely thrilled to know that we have invested in folks who understand the ins and outs of the business that those folks are working on, and can really find the great opportunities that are not only going to help business, but are going to help community. And so what we want is, put that money to work in ways that not only is a sound investment in the sense that it's not just going into into a vehicle where it may or may not come back, but we know there's good management. We know there's a process that is rooted in community, and that it's actually going to make a difference for real people. And so native CDFIs do that, and we love the stories that come out of your work, of native CDFIs work, and we're so excited to continue to learn.
Let me just add a couple points, agreeing with everything Andreas has said. But in addition to that, we have really valued our relationship with Oweesta and applaud what they have done in terms of supporting the growth of native CDFIs. And the things that we've liked to, that we've appreciated about the relationship, but also in terms of working with CDFIs, is the fact that they can tailor resources to the needs of the communities. They're also well positioned to be a magnet for other resources, whether it's foundation resources, whether it's resources from localities and others, to really customize what's needed. And in addition to that, I think that their ability to have relationships with their borrowers. So if their borrower is having an issue, they can have a conversation before there's a problem there. So that ongoing relationship, local relationship, is, I think, as important as well. And the bottom line is, in terms of some communities that have lacked access to banking and loan products, local CDFIs that have led by the people of the community are well positioned to channel those resources to where they're needed the most. So just impressive in terms of the structure and the tailoring of resources is so important. I think makes so much sense.
Awesome. Yeah. So I hear some of the things that are most important to you all is that we're community-led, community-driven, and that we have adapted our products and services specifically to that community in a way that, you know, you at your level can't really do that level of community engagement. So that's exciting. But I think that there was a question that came up in the chat, which I think is really intuitive then. You know, a lot of our CDFIs are sort of smaller grassroots-based organizations, and there are that level of community embedded, but that oftentimes means that they're kind of smaller in size and assets. They're serving smaller and oftentimes rural communities. So one of the questions that came up in the chat are, you know, are investors looking at various scales for investment for organizations with smaller assets? How are they approaching that challenge of assets? And look, Susan, okay, she's raising her head. She's ready. Okay.
Happy to jump in on that one, because that's definitely a challenge that we faced when we looked at deploying $25 million in 2 quarters and really not having past experience in this field. And so our answer to this was really to look for collaborations. And we were heartened to find that nationally, there are collaborations. And for example, well, Oweesta being a great example where, you know, a collaboration of native CDFIs from all over the country that we could deploy a loan, a low interest loan through Oweesta, and that could reach a variety of individual native CDFIs that our small team that's new to this field would not be able to underwrite on our own. So that kind of partnership has really been our answer to this.
I think Susan's spot on with that in terms of how we approach it. We look for really good, solid intermediaries that have got good networks. In addition to that, in terms of the CDFIs in our portfolio, we'd like to have a mix of small, medium, and large, so that we do give some of the newer CDFIs an opportunity to borrow from us and to have that kind of experience. And we also love to make referrals to others in our network that might be looking for some newer CDFIs that are fit for their programmatic areas.
Awesome. And anything, Andreas, that you wanted to hop in on that one? He's shaking his head. No, he's got it. You guys nailed it. Wonderful. Okay, now I wanted to circle back. You know, Sarah, this is not your first rodeo. You've done quite a few investments. You've been through the due diligence process with many partners. It's important to note that Mercy was one of the first investors in Oweesta, and I think Sarah remarked earlier about sort of the engagement of the religious impact investors were one of the first in, and we certainly found that to be true in our portfolio 20 years ago. So much gratitude in that space. But could you talk a little bit, we started to touch on this a little bit, but could you talk a little bit about, you know, what are important things as you go through the due diligence process with an organization that, you know, make a favorable impression on you, or things alternatively that maybe make you uncomfortable and are red flags for you, or areas that you kind of have to work and say maybe, oh, not yet, but maybe in a year or two? Because it sounds like size isn't a barrier for you. So, you know, what, can you just talk a little bit about sort of that due diligence process with your organization? Sure.
Well, it's, you know, we're about impact. So that's the first question that we have, and first conversations we have is all about that. We will share with potential borrowers a checklist of needed information that they'll get back to us. And, you know, it's important that when they do submit materials, that those are clear. But in addition to what routine things that we ask them for, it's important for them to help us understand the unique challenges that they may face in their, respective communities. And we also like it if the CDFIs are upfront about risks and challenges. We know that lending in the communities that we're targeting is challenging, but it's important for us to hear about how the organization is addressing those, and as they move forward, the kind of strategies that they're taking to address some of those challenges. We also like to see great examples of success stories. And sometimes, believe it or not, we have to dig it out of the CDFIs that some just aren't used necessarily to broadcasting their good news and bragging. But it's important for us to understand the impact that their lending is having on a local level. Just broadly in terms of our underwriting, in addition to impact, and we'll be asking for strategic plans and annual reports, we look at the kind of social impact data that the organization is collecting, and that could be in a variety of ways, whatever makes sense for the program, but we want to know what the process is and how they evaluate the impact. Look for information that they have that addresses the quality of the program. And there's a whole nother cluster that has to do with the organizational strength and the management capacity of the organization. You want to know about the management team, board of directors. During the conversations, if it's a newer CDFI, we'll want to have a conversation with some board members in addition to the lead staff person. Understanding the track record, understanding the challenges that got them there. And then there's the financial piece. We want to understand what their financial strength is to carry out the program that they're proposing, who else is involved, are there other investors. Oftentimes we'll talk to some of the other investors about their experience. Certainly look at the audited financials, quarterly financials, policies and procedures. None of this is surprise information, but it's something that we take a lot of time looking at. I'd say in terms of red flags, biggest one I'd say is I don't want any surprises. Whether it's something that's buried in an audit note, if there's a challenge, let us know about it up front. I was in the middle of underwriting an opportunity once and was on the website and learned that the executive director was moving on. It's like, I don't want to read about something like that on the website. I want someone to let me know early on. So the earlier, the better, any kind of news like that. If financials aren't current, that's certainly red flag. And I'd also say, just in terms of your website, your forward-facing material, make sure you keep that up to date, because for many of us, that could be some of the early ways that we learn about a variety of organizations. And to the extent that we look at it and there's, the last posting was 2018, that might say something about how the organization is being run and the level of activities. So those would be just a few observations.
Mm-hmm. So I heard a couple of themes on that. One was about transparency and just being able to share and being willing to share if there were issues or what they're going to be, and provide context around what you're going to find in the due diligence process. I also heard sort of a need, and I would just say that this is a need at Oweesta too, around sort of doing our success story sharing, right? And I feel this so strongly. We're so busy doing the work. We so rarely get a chance to stop and tell about it, especially this last year in COVID. So it's really good to hear that is important and something that we need to prioritize at our organizations. Andreas, is there anything you want to build off of what Sarah was sharing?
No, I think Sarah did a fantastic job of describing the process. Ours is pretty similar, I'd say. We're asking many of the same questions, asking for, audited financial statements, as I think typically 5 years is what we ask. And absolutely, if there are issues, I would just underscore that point. If there are issues or internal questions or concerns, better to address them head on and say, hey, this has been an issue and here's how we're dealing with it. We'd much rather hear that sort of example, which is a reflection of good leadership, than to have our analysis come up with something that doesn't make sense, or it would give us pause. And again, just that point, and I mean, both of you just said it, capturing and sharing some of the impact stories, the social impact stories, is really powerful. Actually, the way we do our analyses, we have a bifurcated and kind of interconnected analysis. I do a social impact write-up. Our investment guide does the financial impact write-up. And so when our board of directors meets to consider, our investment committee first, and then our board of directors meets to consider a program-related investment, they're reading both the social impact and the financial impact. And we want to be able to tell a wonderful story on both fronts. And the more we're able to do that, the more our board's going to be excited about this work, and the more compelling the argument is. And at the same time, I recognize that takes time. I mean, I lead a small organization. Everybody has too much to do already. So I think that's one of those areas where, as the native CDFI sector in general, really can think about, what are some common approaches to what are some templates to use for extracting some of those stories in a reasonable way, and how to capture those, and more broadly, I'd love to see continued development on how to capture that social impact piece in ways that don't tax the already overtaxed staff of native CDFIs more than is reasonable.
Awesome. Wonderful. Well, it sounds like we have gotten some more chat feedback about what's important to our native CDFIs and those investor relationships. Steph, could you go ahead and share some of what came through the chat, and what were the themes that emerged in the comments?
Did you mean Steph G?
Oh,
Sorry, I'm on mute and I went with the video. Okay, yeah, so a few have rolled in, and the themes that we're seeing are investors looking at various scales for investments for organizations with smaller assets. So a lot of people have been posing in the chat that we're looking for this type of investment. We're looking for this. Just looking on down. So also interested in long-term housing capital. A few people have posed that. Appreciative of their relationships and open dialogues about ROI and scale for rural communities, but really looking for those long-term sustainable relationships. So any remarks around that? And then is anyone looking at participatory loans as well? Yeah.
Wonderful. Okay, thanks. Yeah, some themes about flexibility, long-term relationship, some themes about scale, which is interesting because that so clearly mimics sort of your comments. So I love that. I do feel we're a match made in heaven, social investments and native CDFIs. But does anyone want to jump in on sort of, especially that question about participatory lending and participatory investment models? Does anyone want to give any thoughts that they might have around those questions or themes?
Sure, let me just offer a few thoughts. One organization that does participation loans with CDFIs is Partners for the Common Good, based in Washington, D.C. So that would be a good resource for those of you who are interested in learning more about that. There are often times when several of us will share our underwriting and due diligence work and be co-investors. So that's another model that has been that makes a lot of sense for us. You know, like Andreas, we have a very small team, and so we really value our networks and the learnings that we have from each other, as well as the connections that we have from each other. I think in terms of for affordable housing and the need for longer term fund financing, I think that's a challenge that we're not well suited to assist with. That, you know, around 5 years is where our comfort level is because of the nature of our funds, but other social investors, you know, may have other timeframes that are better fit for them.
Yeah, I could jump in on that. We do have the ability. We tend to make, you know, investments at a somewhat, you know, larger scale, and we do have the ability in terms of longer term, you know, with some limits, like, you know, up to, let's say, 10 years, you know, is something, you know, depending on the risk profile, you know, but in some cases we can do the 10-year, but our interest rate is also quite flexible. We're right now at about 0.5% for some of our loans and up to 2%. So we have those advantages, but as you've heard, we also have some disadvantages that, you know, we do have a national scope. So trying to find those ways that we can deploy our capital. And I guess to me that gets to don't know exactly how there's a few ways to use the word participatory. As I mentioned, we absolutely tend to go through collaborative vehicles. And with that, there's both the collaboration, like in the case of Oweesta, being a collaboration of CDFIs that we can invest with and through, as well as collaborations of investors. So we are very actively and proactively, as we're entering a new field right now, working to build those investor relationships where we can kind of ride the coattails. And on a number of these 6 investments that we did, the 25 million, a number of those were with another co-investor who had long-term experience in the community lending field. As I mentioned, I have a bit of individual experience, but it's somewhat out of date. So having those kind of investor relationships that we can ride along with, you know, has been really tremendously helpful as we enter this space. I hear in the chat the word being participatory also being used in terms of power sharing and decision making. So I just want to kind of acknowledge that is something that, as we are looking at our sort of our new justice and equity frame that we're putting on our grant making and investing, that is something we're very much talking about how do we implement power sharing within grant making and or investing. Again, we're early in the journey, but I just want to acknowledge that, certainly aware that is an important conversation and one that we're having.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you so much, Susan. I'm curious around that idea of sort of including the ultimate partners in the decision-making process. It sounds like, Andreas, that you've been looking at sort of board representation and engagement. I'm curious, are there other ways that people are thinking through that issue and how to sort of make, you know, as we think about real relationships, you know, how do we navigate those power dynamics and make sure that the people's voice who are being represented are at the table? And I was just curious how the rest of you all are thinking through that too. And thank you, Susan, for sort of grabbing that thread. That's really a valuable one.
Well, perhaps while others are thinking, one thing I'll just say to expand on that. So how part of the reason we've been successful in bringing a couple Indigenous voices onto our board, and we just added a fantastic Kenyan woman to our board beginning of this year. We do work in East Africa and Tanzania as well. Part of the reason we've been successful has been our board is willing to roll up its sleeves and do intentional learning with us, with the staff. And for example, we had our last pre-COVID board retreat was in Boulder, Colorado, and we had Crystal Cornelius and others from Oweesta with us for dinner and for presentations and conversation. And that's something we do a lot with our board is create opportunities for intentional learning and meeting folks, our partners, our grantee partners, and others in this space. And what that helps us do is you know, get more of that insight but also then spark those conversations about what else should we be doing. And the more we can bring ideas to the table and knowing and acknowledging that we have a lot to learn, and that includes with how we've concluded our investments with some of the native CDFIs that we're invested in. Sometimes it's taken longer than we wanted, and usually that's because of our processes, not because of the CDFI's processes. We're in learning mode still, even a few years into this, and I know that other peers that I have in the foundation world say similar things. They're learning and figuring it out, and what that means to me is there are likely going to be opportunities to help define what good participatory investing really means, what that looks like. I know there are great people working on those sorts of issues. There are different levels of work on that in terms of who's at the table versus who's making actual decisions about money flowing from a CDFI, for example. We certainly don't have any input, nor would we ever want any input on where our native CDFI partners put the money that we have lent to them. Those are things that we'd love to see the native CDFIs continue to, as they learn, as you all learn, continue to push those conversations for a broader agenda. Those are some of the immediate thoughts that I have on that.
Awesome. Thank you, Andres. Sarah, do you have anything to add?
I just add in terms of, we have really found site visits with our investment committee to be really helpful. We've tried to do one, every 12 to 18 months of pre-pandemic, and just a terrific opportunity to learn more in depth about the organizations, the needs, those involved, and to hear the voices of those who are impacted the most.
All right, so everyone, this is sort of the last call for questions. I want to pause and, please go ahead. We're going to have a little bit of open time here to light up the chat boards a little bit. If there were any lingering questions about what folks shared, I'd love to hear them come through now. We just got one, it looks like, from Andy Gordon. In addition to storytelling, anecdotal descriptions of projects, are specific social impact data collected over time and dashboards being developed to highlight areas for investor learning and advocacy to grow interest in capital for impact investment in Native American projects? Yeah, so that's a great one, Andy. I will just add, from my perspective at Oweesta, that is one of the things that we're thinking through a lot. We have, of course, for those of you, our native CFIs that are on our Opportunity Through Impact system, where we're sort of trying to solidify and put together the sort of way we communicate and share our story. And why have 8,000 versions of a business loan application? Can we try to gather the same data, and so that we can share the same sort of data points? We're certainly trying to think about that. And for those of you who were able to join our opening with sort of our impact stats on our portfolio, I think you can start to see some of those threads. And I know our native CDFIs are doing that too. Does any of our investment partners know of any efforts that they wanted to highlight here? Okay, no worries.
But I just want to say that we certainly value the work that Oweesta is doing in this area. So we read the information that you send, in terms of publications and summaries of sessions. So that's a good way to continue to share those learnings with a broader group of investors.
Awesome. Yes. And much gratitude, of course, to every single person who's filled out a survey from Oweesta in the last 10 years, because we learned so much in that space, and we gather so much ability to sort of share data and stories. In 2012, of course, we did our first sort of snapshot of sort of investing in Native communities and impact. And then we revisited in 2018, right? And we were able to see sort of the exponential growth of our industry, the exponential growth of actually investors that were interested in the field. In the beginning, that first sort of snapshot of the field, there were very few investors interested in the space. It was pretty much the federal government, the CDFI fund. And in our last snapshot, we could see sort of this explosion of interest that was starting to build in philanthropic circles around the work of Native CDFIs. So So that's great to know, Sarah, that work is valuable on the sphere, and that work is not possible without our partners who fill out quarterly borrower reports and all of that great work. So thank you for that. I'd like to just pause and then ask if sort of in our last few minutes here, if you had sort of one piece of advice to share with a native CDFI partner that's looking to attract investment and build a relationship, what would be sort of your last, brief takeaway that you would want to pass on from our dialogue today? And I'll start with Susan.
Okay, sure. Well, I guess I would speak from the point of view of, a larger private foundation, which I represent, to say, I think one thing that I would say I didn't fully realize until I got within a foundation was how much the investing really is very aligned. It really is strategic priorities, very specific strategies, then theories of change that are all laid out. And so I think I had more the view before I was inside a foundation. If I could just have them understand how great my work is, then that should be that should be everything. And I think for a lot of large foundations, because they're very much from a strategic priority approach, it's more about finding a foundation that's aligned to your own programmatic priorities. And I guess the addendum to that for foundations like ourselves that are in the process of revisiting those strategic and programmatic priorities, really an invitation to work with us as we develop those strategies. And I'm very respectful of people's time. I realize as we're going through a learning and strategy journey, I want to be very respectful of everyone's time, but certainly we benefit a lot from all of your perspectives as we go through that journey and create our strategy going forward.
I think I'd add, in addition to the programmatic fit that Susan mentioned, also recognize that different social investors have different kind of resources. So some may be better suited to short-term opportunities versus long-term opportunities. Some may have more flexibility than others in interest rates. So just be mindful of the diversity that there are within the social investing community.
Both very, very sound pieces of advice that I absolutely agree with. And then I think the other piece of it is, don't be afraid to ask. Like that's the other piece, because we have been funding on the grant side in Indian country for 5 years since we made our loan to Oweesta 2019 now, a little over 2 years ago, and then we've continued on in this space. I don't know that a single native CDFI has ever approached us, and not that we're famous or out there, like we're not a huge name foundation, but I think there's I don't think we're a bellwether in any way, but I do think that suggests to me that there's probably opportunity out there for native CDFIs to to get out there and to reach out to folks a little bit more. And you got to be ruthless with your own time and say, that's a conversation that could go somewhere and that might not, and use your time wisely. But, fundamentally not, actually being creative about outreach, about to meet your capital needs, because I know you have them. Like that's the big one. I know you have good things to put capital to. I'd love to see, the flip side of foundations needing to do better about getting out there. Obviously, I'm taking that as a given here, but really like telling your story and putting out there, hey, we need this support. There have to be more creative ways to do that, and I encourage you to find them and to also partner with foundations who want to partner with you on that aspect of it.
Awesome. Yes, Andreas, everybody heard that right. Everybody's going to call Andreas after this panel.
I'm a straight shooter. I'll tell you if it's possible or not. And I think that's actually on that, Crystal, I don't think any of us should be in the foundation business if we can't say a gracious no. And I mean, there are a lot of foundations that don't want you to ask, that they just want you, they want to be the ones that ask. I don't think that's good practice. I don't think that's equitable practice.
Mhm.
And so, yeah, absolutely, reach out to me. And if I think Better Way can be helpful, then I'll say so. If not, then no. And I encourage my peers in this industry to do the same. So.
Mm. Like I said, these are good people. I said it at the beginning. I'll speak it again. We have some good people on this panel. So much gratitude to them. I know there were a couple in the chat we didn't get to on the question front, but we did have some great dialogue today. So thank you all so much for that. If you're a native CDFI and you're interested in learning a little bit more about what to expect in the due diligence process, I would just put a plug out that we do have a session on that, a breakout session. I think it's tomorrow. So look for that. If you're like, what are they going to want from me? What does that look like? We're ready for investment. Please definitely check that out. And thank you all so much for joining. And please stay on the line for we're going to hop into the Investor Club conversation. And you can access that through the Zoom link there, and please join that and cheer on your fellow native CDFIs. And if you're an investor, please stay on in that space and hear a little bit from the work that about our native CDFIs are doing. So with that, thank you all.
Thank you so much for joining. And as Crystal stated, please jump on the next line. We're going to have a very interactive session where we'll hear from native CDFIs pitching. So look forward to seeing you right now at 1 p.m. Mountain Time. Thank you.